Take a look at this. Beautiful, isn't it? The Amazon, the lungs of the earth. Now, forget everything you just saw. That paradise is a lie. If you stepped foot on this continent 10 million years ago, you wouldn't be looking at a forest. You would be standing in a biological prison, a place where South America was cut off from the rest of the world, floating alone in the ocean like a lost raft. And in that isolation, something went wrong. Evolution broke the rules. There were no lions here, no wolves. Instead, the things that lived in the dark grew into monsters that defy physics. Snakes the size of trains, birds that butchered horses, crocodiles that could crush a car like a soda can. You are about to enter the green hell. These are the top 5 nightmares of prehistoric South America, and I promise you, the last one will change how you look at your own history. Our journey begins 60 million years ago, in the Pleistocene epoch. The dust has just settled from the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs, and the world is healing. But in northern South America, specifically in what is now the Cerrejón Formation of Colombia, the climate has turned into a suffocating greenhouse. The average temperature is scorching, the humidity is oppressive, and the jungle is denser than anything we know today. In this thermodynamic pressure cooker, cold-blooded metabolism goes into overdrive. With no dinosaurs to compete with, reptiles seize the opportunity to reclaim the throne, and one creature rises above them all to become the largest predator on land or sea. If you have a fear of snakes, you might want to look away, because lurking in these murky river systems is the Titanoboa carrageensis. To truly grasp the scale of this entity, you have to forget everything you know about modern snakes. A modern green anaconda is impressive, reaching lengths of maybe 20 feet on a good day, but Titanoboa was a biological anomaly. Fossils suggest this behemoth stretched over 42 feet, 13 meters in length, and weighed more than a ton, roughly 2,500 pounds. To put that into perspective, Titanoboa was longer than a Tyrannosaurus rex and as heavy as a sedan. If it slithered down a modern street, its body would stretch past a school bus, and its thickest point would be waist-high to an average human. It was an animal so large that it barely makes sense on land. It was a creature designed entirely for the dark, warm embrace of the river. But size wasn't its only weapon. Its true power lay in its engineering. This monster wasn't venomous. It didn't need to be. It was a constrictor, similar to modern boas, but scaled up to nightmare proportions. When it struck, the impact alone would be like getting hit by a motorcycle. Once it wrapped its coils around the victim, the game was over. Scientists estimate that Titanoboa could exert a crushing pressure of 400 pounds per square inch. Imagine lying down on the ground and having the entire Brooklyn Bridge stacked on top of your chest. That is the force we are talking about. It wouldn't just suffocate you. It would shatter your skeletal structure and collapse your circulatory system in seconds, turning its prey into a soft, easily swallowable meal. And what does a 1-ton snake eat? It certainly doesn't hunt rats. Titanoboa required massive caloric intake to sustain its immense bulk. It preyed on 10-foot lungfish and giant turtles like carbonomes, creatures with shells as thick as armor plating that were crushed like eggshells in the snake's grip. It also hunted ancient crocodilians, turning the usual predator-prey dynamic on its head. In the swamps of the Paleocene, the crocodile was not the hunter. It was lunch. For millions of years, Titanoboa was the undisputed king of this tropical sauna. But as the global temperature began to cool, the metabolic costs of being a giant snake became too high to pay, and the titan eventually faded into the mud of history. However, as the swamps dried up, a new terror was evolving to fill the vacuum. This time, not in the water, but on land, and it had more teeth than you could count. Fast forward to the Miocene epoch, roughly 10 million years ago. The global thermostat has adjusted, but South America is still a wet, swampy world. In fact, a massive portion of the continent is covered by the Pebas mega wetland, a colossal system of lakes and swamps that would make the modern Everglades look like a puddle. In these murky waters, the vacuum left by Titanoboa was filled by something far more aggressive and infinitely more terrifying: Purussaurus brasiliensis. If Titanoboa was a silent assassin, Purussaurus was a tank rolling through a battlefield. This wasn't just a crocodile, it was the ultimate expression of the crocodilian body plan, pushed to its absolute biological limit. Imagine a black caiman, but scale it up until it is nearly the size of a train car. We are talking about a reptile reaching lengths of 35 to 40 feet, around 11 to 12 meters, and weighing over 8 tons. To visualize this, picture a creature as long as a city bus, but much lower to the ground, heavily armored with osteoderms, bone plates embedded in the skin that made it nearly invulnerable to attack. However, the true terror of Purussaurus wasn't just its body size, it was its head. Modern crocodiles have relatively flat, streamlined snouts, but Purussaurus had a massive, boxy skull that was thickened and reinforced to withstand insane amounts of physical stress. Why? Because of its bite force. Paleontologists have run biomechanical simulations on this skull, and the results are terrifying. While the legendary Tyrannosaurus rex had a bite force of roughly 35,000 to 57,000 newtons, Purussaurus is estimated to have clamped down with a force of 69,000 newtons, roughly 7 tons of pressure. This means Purussaurus had a bite nearly twice as powerful as a T-Rex. It didn't just bite prey, it pulverized them. It could grab a car and crush it into a cube of scrap metal instantly. This bite allowed it to hunt absolutely anything it wanted in the Pebas wetlands. It fed on 3-meter tall turtles, like Stupendomes, piercing their impenetrable shells as if they were made of paper, and it hunted giant sloths and prehistoric relatives of the hippo that wandered too close to the water's edge. The scariest part of this animal's biology is the concept of the death roll. Modern crocodilians spin their bodies to tear chunks of meat off their prey because they cannot chew. Now imagine an 8-ton animal performing a death roll. The turbulence alone would be enough to drown nearby creatures. In the water, Purussaurus was a god. Nothing could challenge it. But geological forces were at work that even this monster couldn't bite through. As the Andes Mountains continued to rise, they altered the flow of water across the continent. The massive Pebas mega-wetland began to drain and dry up, destroying the habitat required to support such a massive cold-blooded body. The reign of the giant reptiles was coming to an end. As the waters receded and the land opened up, the throne of South America was left vacant once again. But this time, the new rulers wouldn't come from the water. They would descend from the clouds. As the wetlands receded, and the vast pampas grasslands began to dominate the continent around 6 million years ago, the horror didn't disappear. It just changed its address. It moved from the murky depths of the river to the open sky. If you were standing on the plains of ancient Argentina and looked up, you wouldn't see the sun. You would see the shadow of a biological impossibility. This was Argentavis magnificens, the largest flying bird ever discovered. To call it a bird feels almost insulting. It was essentially a biological glider the size of a Cessna 152 light aircraft. While a modern Andean condor is an impressive sight with its 10-foot wingspan, it would look like a sparrow next to Argentavis. This titan boasted a wingspan of roughly 21 to 23 feet, 7 meters. Imagine standing on a basketball court. This creature's wings would stretch from the hoop almost to the 3-point line. Its feathers alone were the size of samurai swords, measuring up to 1.5 meters in length. But the existence of Argentavis presents a terrifying physics problem. Weighing in at roughly 160 pounds, it was pushing the absolute upper limit of powered flight. It was so heavy that it couldn't simply flap its wings to take off like a pigeon. Instead, it had to rely on the strong thermal currents rising from the scorching South American plains to stay aloft, surfing the air like a hang glider. From the ground, it would have looked like a silent, dark cloud drifting overhead, constantly scanning the terrain for the dead or the dying. While there is debate about whether it was an active predator, the leading theory paints a picture of a terrifying kleptoparasite, a professional bully. It likely used its sheer size to intimidate other predators, swooping down to steal their kills. Imagine the wind force generated by those wings as it landed. It was enough to knock over smaller animals. With a beak hooked like a meat hook and a throat wide enough to swallow a hair whole, it ruled the skies with impunity. Yet, for all its majesty in the air, Argentavis was clumsy and vulnerable on the ground. And that is where the real danger lay. Because while Argentavis had conquered the sky by growing larger, another group of birds had decided to conquer the earth by getting faster, meaner, and evolving a beak that worked like a guillotine. The grasslands below were becoming a slaughterhouse, dominated by a family of predators that shouldn't have existed. In most parts of the world, mammals had taken over the apex predator role after the dinosaurs died. But in South America, the dinosaurs never really left. They just evolved. Meet the forest wrasses, affectionately known by science as the terror birds. And the biggest, baddest, and most nightmarish of them all was Kelenken guillermoi. If you think an ostrich or a cassowary is intimidating, Kelenken is what happens when evolution decides to mix an ostrich with a velociraptor and give it a serious anger management problem. Standing nearly 10 feet, 3 meters tall, this bird could look down on a professional basketball player. But it wasn't its height that froze the blood of its prey. It was its weapon. Kelenken possessed the largest bird skull ever discovered, measuring a staggering 28 inches. That is a head larger than that of a horse. But instead of a muzzle for grazing, it ended in a hooked beak as sharp as a pickaxe and as hard as iron. The frightening thing about Kelenken was its speed. Titanoboa was slow and ambush reliant, and Purussaurus was bound to the water. Kelenken was a pursuit predator. Biomechanical studies suggest it could reach speeds of up to 30 to 40 miles per hour, easily outrunning the primitive ungulates and small mammals of its time. Imagine being chased by a predator that is faster than a racehorse and taller than a bear. There was no escaping it. Once it caught up to you, it didn't use claws like a raptor. It used its head. It would sprint alongside its prey and deliver rapid, vertical strikes with its massive beak. This wasn't a nip or a peck. It was a pile driver motion designed to shatter skulls and snap spines instantly. The force of the impact would stun the prey, allowing the bird to tear off flesh while the victim was still alive. For millions of years, Kelenken was the fastest executioner on the continent, the apex predator of the open plains, proving that you didn't need teeth to be a monster. But the reign of the terror birds relied on one crucial factor: isolation. They were the kings of a kingdom with no competition. They had evolved to hunt slow, dumb, endemic mammals. But around 3 million years ago, the geological clock struck midnight. The Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea, connecting South America to North America for the first time. The splendid isolation was over. The Great American Biotic Interchange had begun. Suddenly, the terror birds weren't alone. Crossing the new land bridge from the north was a wave of highly advanced, pack-hunting carnivores that had spent millions of years sharpening their skills against far tougher prey. The birds were about to face a predator that was stronger, smarter, and armed with two of the most iconic weapons in natural history. The feathers were about to fly because the tiger had arrived. The formation of the Isthmus of Panama was the death knell for South America's strange native dynasty. The isolation that had protected creatures like the terror birds was shattered. Pouring over this new land bridge came bears, wolves, and large cats. But the most terrifying of these immigrants was the Smilodon Populator. You might know him as the saber-toothed tiger, but get the image of the North American Smilodon fatalis out of your head. That was a formidable animal, but Smilodon Populator was the version that went to the gym, took steroids, and then went back to the gym. It was the largest felid to ever walk the earth. While an African lion weighs about 400 pounds, Populator tipped the scales at a massive 900 to 1,000 pounds, 400 plus kilos. It was less like a cat and more like a bear in a cat costume. Its upper body was immensely hypertrophied, built for wrestling large prey to the ground, not chasing it. But the crown jewel of its arsenal was, of course, the teeth. Its upper canines grew up to 11 inches. These weren't just for show. They were precision surgical instruments. Smilodon didn't kill by suffocation like a lion. It killed by slashing the throat, severing the carotid artery and windpipe in seconds. When Smilodon met the terror birds like Kelenken, it was a clash of titans, the old world versus the new. The birds had speed, but the cats had brute strength and grappling power. In the end, the mammalian invaders were too versatile, too smart, and too strong. The reptilian and avian dominance that had lasted for 60 million years was crushed under the paws of the saber-tooth. Smilodon became the new king of South America, hunting giant ground sloths and armored glyptodonts across the pampas. It seemed invincible. It had conquered 2 continents. But 10,000 years ago, even this perfect killing machine couldn't survive the arrival of the ultimate apex predator. For millions of years, South America was a land of giants. It was a crucible where Titanoboa squeezed the life out of crocodiles, where Argentavis darkened the skies, and where Smilodon severed the arteries of behemoths. They were the monsters of their time, feared by everything that drew breath. But if you look at the fossil record, there is a distinct line in the sand, a moment when the megafauna began to vanish rapidly. The climate was changing, yes, but something else had arrived on the scene. A strange, hairless bipedal ape that didn't have 12-inch fangs or crushing claws. Instead, this new creature had fire, it had communication, and it had spear throwers. When humans arrived in South America, the balance of power shifted overnight. We didn't fight these monsters with brute force. We outsmarted them. We drove the game into traps. We broke the food chain, and we altered the habitat. The Smilodon, the terror birds, the giant sloths. They were unprepared for a predator that hunted in coordinated teams and could kill from a distance. One by one, the giants fell silent. The roar of the Smilodon was replaced by the crackle of campfires. Today, when you walk through the Amazon or the grasslands of Argentina, you are walking over a graveyard of titans. The monsters are gone, leaving only their bones behind as a warning. We are the survivors. We are the reason the dark is quiet. But looking at these bones, one has to wonder, if nature could produce such horrors once, what might it be cooking up for the future?